Barrie Schwortz spent years studying the Shroud of Turin, and his conclusions will shock you. What I'm about to reveal in this video is almost 2 decades of research, culminating in the most incredible discovery of our lifetime.
What do you know about the Shroud of Turin? It seems the more we find out about the Shroud, the more amazing we realize it is. Do me a favor and watch this clip.
Think about this. Whoever rescued that cloth out of the tomb put themselves in as much risk as Jesus himself.
That's right.
Now, would you do that if it was just your neighbor down the street, Joe Blow? Or would you do that if it was worth the risk to preserve something of someone you believed to be the prophesied Messiah?
Barrie Schwortz spent years studying the Shroud of Turin, and his conclusions will shock you. What I'm about to reveal in this video is almost 2 decades of research, culminating in the most incredible discovery of our lifetime. You're not going to want to miss a second of this story.
We did. We worked 5 days and nights around the clock, didn't get much sleep, but at the same time we accomplished a very aggressive test plan with a very long list of experiments. As a matter of fact, you can see the original test plan that we submitted to the owner of the shroud, King Umberto of the Savoy family, who had owned the shroud for over 500 years. Frequently people say, well, isn't it wonderful that the church allowed you to examine the shroud? The church had nothing to do with it.
Schwartz is a highly qualified photographer with a focus on technical and medical photography, and the team needed his experience. But he hesitated when the team approached him with the opportunity. At the moment, he didn't know how his experience would fit into the project, so he refused at first. But something made him change his mind. He finally agreed and became a part of the Shroud of Turin research project. It was a unique and groundbreaking study, not a casual look at a piece of antique fabric. A group of specialists in physics, chemistry, and imaging science studied for 6 days and nights, non-stop. And as Schwartz captured every detail with his camera, he started to notice something puzzling, something unexplainable. How on earth did this relic manage to survive for centuries while still being so well preserved and detailed? And what about those mysterious inscriptions on the fabric? Were they really proof of something beyond human understanding? Schwartz, who once wondered why he should be interested in the shroud, now felt a deeper connection to its mystery. He would describe it as not of this world decades later. What does that mean? Is it a divine artifact, a technological wonder, or something else? Barrie Schwartz didn't just have doubts about the Shroud of Turin, he firmly believed it was simply an ancient painting. Back in 1978, that was the common belief, and he thought he'd take a quick glance, pick out a few brush strokes, and wrap things up in no time. He even made a joke about it in public, which would haunt him for decades. At the time, his mindset was far from scientific curiosity. He considered it as nothing more than a free trip to Italy. He admitted that his attitude was immature. But there was something about the shroud that just wouldn't let him go. He tried to walk away twice, but the mystery of Shroud was drawing him in. Then Don Lin, a well-known imaging specialist who had worked on groundbreaking missions like Voyager and Galileo, joined the team from NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. After he joined, things took an unexpected turn. As a professional photographer, Schwartz was in awe of Lin's qualifications and couldn't help but respect him. During one of their planning sessions, Schwartz finally decided to ask a question that had been bothering him for a while. He asked Lin, "Why am I on this team as a nice Jewish guy?" Lin didn't even pause. He emphasized that Jesus, the man in question, was actually Jewish. Schwartz laughed, admitting that was probably the only thing he knew about Jesus at the time. Then Lin said something that hit Schwartz like a lightning strike. "Perhaps God wanted one of his chosen people on the team," he said, with an almost divine certainty. Schwartz was first ready to leave the Shroud of Turin because he thought it was not worth his time. Then NASA imaging expert Lin said something that will stay with him for the rest of his life. Lynn advised him to travel to Turin, do the best job he could, and have faith that the larger plan will become clear eventually. Those words were enough to make him stay. He had no idea that those few simple words would lead him into a mystery that science is still unable to fully solve. Barrie and the team conducted many tests over the course of the following 3 years. Their goal was to provide an answer to the most important question: how did the image on the shroud form? The results were shocking. They carefully ruled out the traditional explanations in every test they conducted. There were no colors or brush strokes, so the shroud was not a painting. Since there was no sign of burning, it wasn't a scorch, and it was definitely not a photograph because nothing comparable could be created at the time with the technology available. The worst part is, even after years of investigation and examination, they still couldn't pinpoint a mechanism capable of creating the image with the special qualities of the shroud. When the team published their findings in reputable, peer-reviewed journals, every assertion had to withstand scrutiny. Despite all the scientific research, the shroud still remains a mystery that can't be explained. Schwortz needed almost 20 years to process what he had witnessed. After all the tests, the data, and the expert opinion, his doubts remained. Even in 1995, 18 years after he had first studied the shroud, he continued to reject the possibility that it was real. The blood on the shroud was the problem. It was still red. Everyone knows that the old blood may turn dark in a matter of hours, so that didn't make sense. Because of this single detail, Barrie didn't believe the shroud was real. Then came the fateful phone call with Dr. Alan Adler, a Jewish man like Barrie and a world-renowned blood specialist. Over the phone, Adler calmly described a science that would completely change everything. He told Barrie that the blood exhibited elevated bilirubin levels. Barrie listened without knowing what it meant. Adler went on to explain that people who undergo extreme torture, such as being beaten, whipped, crowned with thorns, and finally crucified, experience a surge of bilirubin in their blood as a result of the shock. The blood with that level of bilirubin never turns dark. It'll always be red. At that moment, Barrie felt the final piece of the puzzle fit into place. All his doubts vanished, and he realized that the proof had been right in front of him. He recalled a quote he had come across in his childhood. Sherlock Holmes once said, "Once you eliminate the impossible, whatever remains, no matter how improbable, must be the truth." That, coupled with the simplicity of Occam's razor, the simplest explanation is usually the right one, left Barrie with only one possible conclusion. The shroud was real. It was Jesus of Nazareth's burial cloth. Over the years, Barrie noticed that media coverage of the shroud often fell short of expectations and was either misleading or false. He knew the truth because he had researched the shroud himself and had access to insider information. Barrie had experience in the media, so he knew how easy it was for the public to fall for dramatic headlines. Even though there were perhaps a billion more deserving people in the room in 1978, he would often ask himself, why me? Yet there he was, as if some divine force had pulled him there against his will and would not let him go. For Barrie, the work was never about fame or recognition. The goal was discovering and sharing the truth. Fast forward to 1996, Barrie got a phone call from a friend. The conversation started casually. He asked, "You know that shroud thing you're involved with?" Barrie said, "Yeah," wondering where this was heading. He continued, "Well, it turns out that it's just a photograph made by Leonardo da Vinci." Barrie first thought it was a joke and he laughed, but his friend was serious. When Barrie questioned him about the origin of such a ridiculous assertion, his response was just as strange as the assertion. His friend said, "Oh, I've read it in a tabloid while checking out at the grocery store." Barrie realized how limited the public's access to reliable information was. This led to the creation of Shroud.com, which would grow to be the biggest and most extensive source of information about the shroud. It started as a small project, but soon grew beyond his wildest dreams. Today, millions of people visit this site. It even existed before Google. After giving it some thought, Barrie admits that the Shroud has evolved beyond a work or a curiosity. It's his legacy. Although his career has been successful and has seen its ups and downs, nothing comes close to this. He's creating a legacy, a collection of work that his great-grandchildren might someday discover and think, wow, this is what great-grandpa accomplished. Back in 2009, he made a significant move when he started the non-profit Shroud of Turin Education and Research Association, or STERA Inc. For 14 years, he had personally backed the website, but at some point, the workload became too much for him to handle by himself. He knew it was time to switch to a non-profit. Still, he couldn't ignore the lingering doubts that some people had. Why would a Jewish man dedicate himself to preserving the legacy of the Shroud? He would remark, "People question my intentions, but my objective was simple: to guarantee that this wealth of data would continue to be available to researchers in the future." His goal with STERA was to retain the huge amount of data collected over the years so that future studies wouldn't have to start from scratch. The rule against advertising on the website stayed strong and firm. Shroud.com's integrity would stay unchanged, no matter what. Even though he wasn't a scientist, he made it clear that he believed that science was the human race's attempt to comprehend God's creation. His work was more about technical photography than traditional science. Still, his perspective held a lot of weight. He frequently cited Dr. John Heller, his late colleague, who provided an excellent description of their team's work. Surprisingly, there wasn't any clash between religion and science, despite what many people thought. Instead, there was a beautiful harmony, a blend that brought together the best aspects of both worlds. He still sees himself as a scientific role model for religious freedom. His 35 years with the Shroud showed curiosity and an extended search for the truth, which helps in bridging the gap between faith and doubt. The respect he's received throughout the years, not only from Christians but also from Muslims and Jews, often fills him with awe. It's a little strange, he'd say, but even skeptics and atheists, with whom I've argued on innumerable radio and television programs, show me a sort of reluctant respect. It seems like they've realized that I'm just here to be honest. And he can't help but notice the irony. He would add, with a sarcastic smile, "Imagine this, a Jewish man at the Athenaeum teaching future priests about the Shroud of Turin." The event's organizer, Father Gara, was the only one responsible. However, the story takes a deeper twist. After he launched the website and confidently shared his belief in the Shroud's authenticity based on scientific evidence, people started asking him a question he wasn't ready for. This time, they wanted to know about his faith instead of the Shroud itself. What do you believe? He wasn't expecting it. He had to face his own religious beliefs for the first time as an adult at the age of 50. He had to face the one thing he'd been avoiding all his life. Having been raised in a close-knit Orthodox Jewish family with grandparents living under one roof and all the traditions strictly observed, he had rejected it all. But as he was examining his heart, something unexpected happened. With a softer tone, he would say, "I was shocked to discover that God had been there the entire time. He's only waiting for me to turn around and acknowledge him."
This isn't typically what I talk about in these videos, but I am just so amazed sometimes by the abundance of archaeological evidence for the Christian faith. When talking about the Shroud specifically, I have heard no critics dispel any of the information provided in the video that we just saw. I was never a believer in the Shroud, but some of the evidence I have seen come out in the past 5 years has really convinced me. But more importantly, what do you think of the Shroud? Let me know in the comments, and do you want to see more videos like this one? I would love to hear.